Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today. We're really happy to have you here with us for this webinar about the new edition of the AEPS. My name is Amy Klaus, and I'm a marketing manager for early childhood products here at Brooks Publishing. And I'm very happy to have Diane Bricker and Nancy Miller with me today. So before we get started, I just have a few housekeeping tips to help you have a better viewing experience for the webinar. So if you'll close any applications that use bandwidth or other resources on your device, that will help with the viewing experience. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can type them into the questions section of your webinar panel that's on the right-hand side of your screen. There are slides and some handouts in the handout section of your webinar panel. And if you do have any audio issues, you can change your selection to phone and dial in. You also can try reconnecting to the webinar. At the end of our webinar today, we're going to have a short survey. So we encourage you to fill out the survey. We will be choosing one person to win a free book. And we will also have certificates of attendance that are available for all viewers. If you're listening live, you can get that in your handouts panel. And then if you're listening to a recording, we'll be sharing a URL at the end of the webinar today where you can go ahead and download that. We are recording our presentation today, and you'll receive a recording, the link to the recording in your email tomorrow. And as I said, the slide handouts are also a link in the chat. So if you can't access the handouts panel, there's a link in the chat where you can download the slide handouts for today. So now I'm happy to introduce Diane Bricker and Nancy Miller. Dr. Bricker is Professor Emerita and former Director of the Early Intervention Program at the Center on Human Development at the University of Oregon. She is also the former Dean for Academic Programs in the College of Education at the University of Oregon. She was a Professor of Special Education, focusing on the fields of early intervention and social communication. Her professional interests have addressed three major areas: early intervention service delivery approaches, curriculum-based assessment and evaluation, and developmental behavioral screening. Dr. Bricker has written several books and is a primary author of the Ages and Stages Questionnaire Screening Tools and the lead developer of the AEPS. Nancy Miller has been an educator and an occupational therapist in the early childhood field for over 45 years, since graduating from the University of Washington with her master's degree. She has been an early childhood special education classroom teacher, a home resource teacher, a therapist, trainer and consultant, and a coach working in a variety of early childhood settings with teachers, related service providers, paraprofessionals, and families. Until her recent retirement, Nancy worked as an early childhood special education consultant and coach in a suburban public school program in Kansas. The program's teachers used the AEPS second edition and AEPS-I in all early childhood classrooms, and Nancy was the primary trainer and troubleshooter throughout the implementation process, and she provided ongoing support throughout the 14+ years they've been using the AEPS. Program staff participated in several of the pilot studies supporting the changes to this new third edition. And Nancy is excited for the early childhood providers to start using this new edition. So welcome, Diane. Welcome, Nancy.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we can get started with our webinar.
Okay, I guess I'm talking about the objectives, but before I do that, we have had conversations amongst ourselves, and what we would like to do is to be brief, concise with you today, to leave a lot of time, as much as we possibly can, for you to ask us questions, because we think that might be most useful to you. So we're going to go over we're going to skip over the highlights of changes and then turn the floor over to you to ask questions. But what we want to do today is first get a refresher on the AEPS 3 and its link system, and I'll do that very briefly. Discover the exciting updates to the AEPS 3. Nancy will do that. And she will also show you some samples of the test and the curriculum. And then we'll go back to me and I will briefly review some of the data that we have collected on this revised AEPS 3. There, okay. All right. As many of you probably know, the AEPS is a systems approach, and it's been built on a model that tries to link assessment to goal outcome development, to teaching intervention, and to progress monitoring, showing you, as is shown to you in this particular figure. I can't emphasize enough how important I think using systems models in early intervention service delivery is. Otherwise, if you don't have some sort of cohesive way to organize all of the parts and pieces, many of which are moving, then you're probably not going to use resources as well as you might if you worked under a system. So the AEPS is the fundamental tool that underlines what we call this linked system. And again, the four components of it are the assessment, the goal development, the teaching intervention, and the progress monitoring. And you can note in this particular figure, the feedback loop is very deliberate, and that's how we keep it organized. That's how we continue to use information in very effective ways to help us plan and look at the future in terms of service delivery for young children and their families. Next. The AEPS 3 is a revision, as you might expect, of the AEPS 2. And in many ways, it is basically the same system. We have tried to modify it in ways that we think will make it more useful. We think it will be easier for people to use. And Nancy's going to talk in some detail about what some of those changes are. But the way that it helps you is that it ensures that you can collect reliable, useful assessment data. And that assessment data is fundamentally important to everything else you do, because if you don't have good data on your children and their developmental repertoires, then you cannot figure out appropriately what it is that you need to do at the next step. Another very fundamentally important piece to our system is that the data are linked directly to a tiered curriculum, so that when you get your outcome from doing an assessment on a child or group of children, you can go right to the curriculum materials and without too much difficulty figure out where you need to start your intervention. Another aspect of the system is that it tracks and supports emergent skills, so that it will give you a very detailed picture of where children are developmentally and what it is you need to focus on. One of the changes that are probably most prominent is that we have strengthened our attention to children's pre-academic skills, and Nancy's going to talk about the addition of two new areas of math and pre-literacy, and that's because of the increased interest in this country on getting children ready to be successful in school. And so the AEPS has now been redesigned to help you do that. In collaboration with that is the check for school readiness. There is a new component again, which Nancy will talk about, which is really focused on school readiness and is appropriate for older children and children with less severe disabilities. And finally, and one of the, I think it's always been a really important part of the AEPS system, is that it has many mechanisms and strategies to involve families, because we believe the more families are involved, the greater the chances are that children will progress maximally. So, okay, next one. The foundations of the AEPS are that it is an observational assessment. You can use it in other ways, but we strongly advise people to use it as an observational tool to watch what children do on a daily basis and in their familiar environment. Each item has a criterion so that you don't have to guess as to whether the child is doing it or is not doing it. The criterion, again, one of the changes we've made is to try to clarify criterion and make them more explicit so that as people use the tool, it will be less chance and more we're sure that the child has this skill or the child doesn't have the skill. We have changed the scoring system, and Nancy will again talk about this a little bit. We think that the new scoring system will give you more information and more precision, particularly in terms of monitoring progress, so that it gives you more refinement in terms of looking at child change. As I mentioned earlier, families are integral to the process. The more we can involve them, the more they understand how important to their child's education they are, the better we're going to do. So we have a heavy, heavy emphasis, and we have some strategies, some relatively new enhanced strategies for how you might include families. Working with Brooks over the years and some other research organizations, we do now have a system, and did have for the AEPS too, how to link it to child outcomes that are mandated by the federal government, and all of you are required to report those data. And again, we think we have come up with strategies that will make it more efficient and easier for you to do this. In line with that is that we, and particularly the Brooks staff, has worked hard to align the items and the areas and the influences with national and state standards, so that the information that you get from the AEPS 3 should help you in terms of meeting those both state and federal requirements. And finally, it is backed up by research. The research I'll talk about in a little more detail later in the presentation, but it's fundamental to trying to develop tools and curriculum that are evidence-based, and we are dedicated to that proposition as we continue over the years to work on the AEPS.
Okay, I think it's my turn.
Right.
All right. Now we're going to talk about specific featured updates. I'm just a little nervous, so you guys are gonna. I'll get in my groove here in a second, but I'm a little nervous doing this process. But the updates we're going to review today, and I have to tell you, I'm really excited to be part of this because, as you know, most of us that have been using the AEPS for a while have been, excited about these new changes and have been very happy that Brooks has been so receptive and the authors have been so receptive to make these changes. So today we're going to talk about the fact that the AEPS is now one seamless system from birth to 6 years old. So we don't have to have a level 1 and a level 2 anymore. And I don't know about you guys, but I think that's one of the biggest changes, and people are going to be the most excited about just being able to do that in one form. They've also done a lot of review and adjustment to the test items and the criteria. So things have really changed as you start looking at some of the test items across the different areas. We're also, as Diane mentioned, we're going to look at the new test areas, the literacy and the math, and that's pretty exciting. You'll hear about some of the family materials that have been changed and kind of repurposed so that they're a little more friendly to parents and staff, I think. You're also going to learn, as Diane mentioned, she kind of gave a nice preview into the Ready Set, which is a shorter measure that is focused specifically on school readiness. And again, I think a lot of us that work in programs that have pre-K kids 4 years old through 6 years old have been, excited or would be excited to have something that's a little bit shorter and gives you good information about them as they transition into school. And then finally, just spend a little bit of time about the curriculum itself and how this curriculum is, as Diane mentioned again, it's multi-tiered and it's organized around activities and routines as opposed to specific themes or individual teaching strategies. So I think you'll be excited to hear about that. Okay, so we're going to talk specifically about the test itself. Again, it's one continuous assessment. You will no longer have two forms. You will have the child observation form that covers birth to 6. And obviously, by having one form, you're more able to see what the child's range of skills are. You don't have to stop at level 1 and then pick up level 2 and kind of see where they compare or don't compare. Let's see, and Diane did mention this, that it makes it a lot easier to share the results between programs. So like your Part C to Part B, it's going to be a lot easier just to send that information in one fell swoop as opposed to 2 separate forms. Additionally, if you have classrooms where there's 2-year-olds to 3-year-olds, that'll be another easy transition process. The picture on this slide is of the newly formatted child observation data form. And it's, it's got all the assessment areas in it at once from, again, birth to 6. Next slide. Okay, so instead of 6 areas, there are now 8 areas. And as you can see in this slide, the fine motor has 31 and 4 strands. And so again, I'm not going to go through each of those, but you could get an idea of how many items and how many strands are in each test area. Really excited about the color coding. You'll see that the color coding is consistent across all the different tools you'll be using, including the curriculum, the family materials, the assessment materials. So you can always kind of go by these colors and know what you're talking about. One thing I did, because I was curious, and I wanted to see how many items there are compared to AEPS 2. So I looked up to see that volume 1 of AEPS 2 had 249 items and volume 2 had 217. So that was a total of 466. So the streamlining comes in that we've gone into 8 areas instead of 6, and we have 407 items. So it's more streamlined. We have less things to assess, but it's more broad. And then other than that, everything, well, I was going to say one more thing, but other than that, everything stays the same in terms of the test area, the strand, the goals, and the objectives. So the hierarchical nature of this assessment tool stays the same. All right. Test items and criterion have been reviewed and adjustments are made so that there's a lot more clarity of what the tool or what the item is you're assessing, as well as how it looks when you see it. Also, because it was a level 1 and level 2, there was some redundancy. So they've eliminated that redundancy in order to make that process a much smoother process. There are also more examples. Now, examples are when you read the test item and you read the criteria, sometimes it's not always specifically clear what that looks like. So examples and illustrations help clarify what you're seeing. So it gives it and an example would be a little more specific to what you might see. So, and I don't know how many of you can read this, but we're looking at strand D of the cognitive section on reasoning. And that goal number 1, is to use objects to obtain another, or use an object to obtain another object. And the criterion is the child moves or manipulates objects to obtain another object. However, the examples are child moves stool to reach, place an out of reach object, or they might use a wooden spoon to reach and get an object that's not attainable easily. So again, it just specifies and gives you a little more information. Done with that. Go ahead. Okay. The AEPS 3, again, updates the item descriptions and criteria so that basically as you're doing this assessment, you're going to be able to be more accurate and assess accurate and consistent with your scoring, which, as Diane mentioned, is going to allow you to be more reliable in your results, as well as when you're sitting there and trying to come up with teaching and intervention strategies for the children you're assessing, you have a quicker, streamlined way to look at that. Also, it's easier for us to learn as we go through it. It's more clear. Okay. All right. This one is like, if you guys remember, sometimes when we would do a level 1 or a level 2, that youngest age range and the oldest age range, there just didn't seem to be as many items for that level of child. So what they've done is, as they've reviewed all this, they've expanded the difficulty range. So they've added more items in the lower section as well as the upper section. So that should just help even it out in terms of as you look across the developmental ages. Additionally, you'll find new items that reflect current expectations for young children. So the best example, I think, would be this fine motor strand D, which is the use of electronic devices. That wasn't part of the AEPS 2. And so it basically is looking at, it's in fine motor because you're using the finger to activate electronics. And those changes then of all these items provide us with a more comprehensive look at children's skills. And the slide pictured here is the fine motor section. It just kind of gives you a feel for what the subsequent pages on the child observation data form looks like while you're assessing. All right. How am I doing on time?
You're doing good, Nancy. You're good.
Okay, good. The 2 new test areas, excuse me, are literacy and math. And again, these are important skills for school readiness, and it's important to align with state and national early learning standards. You guys may remember in AEPS 2, we could find items about literacy and math throughout portions of the AEPS 2, but the new edition takes them and makes them their own test areas, which makes it so much easier to assess those skills, especially as, like Diane says, the readiness component of going into elementary school is so important these days. And to me, this is another thing I heard a lot of teachers asking for, teachers and staff. You know, we need more literacy, we need more math. So again, they've answered that request. Okay, next slide. So to give you an idea of what's included in literacy and math, you can kind of see literacy has awareness of print concepts, phonological awareness, all the things, the buzzwords that we've been hearing in the research and practice literature. So again, I think it gives you a real good representation of what's considered that pre-literacy, literacy skill needs. And then math has counting and quantitative relationships and reading and writing numbers, and then some beginning addition and subtraction even. So again, that's what's included in those strands. And so basically, by adding these, you in AEPS 3, you'll have a much more robust coverage of those important readiness and pre-academic skills. Okay. Feel like I'm going really fast, but again, you're going to be able to go through this as as we learn more about it and more webinars are done. So you're just getting a brief overview right now. Okay, the scoring system remains the same with a 2, a 0, or a 2, a 1, and a 0. But what's changed is they've now required and will require that when you use an emerging score of 1, you will need to qualify that score. So you will need 1A, and you can see on the slide, 1A means your assistance was provided in some way. You may be prompted, you may be, gave the child a little help in some way or another, but that assistance was needed in order for the child to, do that task. The other one is incomplete, meaning they can do part of it, but not all of it. And then if needed, you can do a 1AI, which is both assistance and is needed and the task is incomplete. And again, that one will be required as you're doing your assessment. However, there will also be the continued use of notes. They're highly recommended to use those notes because they provide more detail about the assessment information you're gathering. One notable change is that instead of behavior, the B for behavior, they are now using a C for conduct. And I don't know about you guys, but I kind of like that change because I always felt like whenever teachers would say, well, his behavior is interfering, it became almost a bias against the child instead of maybe the assessment situation or what was going on in the environment while you were testing. So I think conduct, even though it means pretty much the same thing, it changes that focus away from the child and helps you look more at what is happening around the child as they're trying to do these tasks. Okay, I think that's all on that one. Okay, they'll continue to have assessment activities for us. They're printed out, or you can, they'll be in both the AEPS 3 forms USB, so you can actually print them out and use them, or they'll be in the AEPS I. But the nice thing about these is that you can do it with one child, or you can do it with a group of children. So you can actually do up to 5 kiddos at once and just have this assessment piece as part of what you're doing because you're doing that activity. So the example here is blanket play for a center-based activity. And they tell you how to do it or what to kind of set up. And then they list all the skills across the AEPS test areas that you'll be able to assess if you do that activity. So again, it's convenient, but it takes some familiarity with the tool to start using these more fluently. But again, they've laid it out for us so that we don't have to do a lot of that work ourselves. It includes 10 center-based activities and 10 home-based activities. Okay, let me turn the page. Okay, another staff tool that they've added is called the Quick Reference Guides, and they are also color-coded, as you can see. So again, that color coding helps you know what test areas you're looking at. The nice thing about this is that it lists the items and the criteria in clear, consistent format. So you can pick these up, carry them with you, and look at these while you're doing an assessment. So I think once you become familiar with the new test items and the criteria, having this tool to carry with you around the classroom or in the home while you're doing any kind of assessment is going to be a nice addition, because I know a lot of teachers made their own of these forms. It's sold as a packet, and it includes the 9 laminated guides, so it comes all laminated for you. And so one for each developmental area, but then also one for the Ready Set, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Okay. All right, we're going to switch over to family materials. Again, I know this is quick and dirty, and I feel like we're going really fast, but just giving you a broad brush stroke of what's available and what's changed, I think helps you as you get ready for further webinars that are going to come your way to learn more about it. Okay, so the family materials they've been improved so that they increase your ability to communicate with families. They make it much more user-friendly for families, and I think as well as staff. And so instead of, before we had the family report and there was a section 1 and a section 2, and it was all in this big, thick packet. And I think when families got the packet, it was so overwhelming that they felt like, oh my gosh, do I really have to fill this whole thing out? That just seemed like a lot of work. So now they've divided that up into 2 separate forms, and they've made some revisions to make it a little more concise and helpful to families. These forms are available in both Spanish and English. They're available on the USB. And again, I keep referring to this USB, but part of the assessment packet when you get it includes a USB with all the forms on it. And then of course, overall, this helps your program meet family engagement requirements, because that's another important topic in our field right now is family involvement. Okay, next one. The first form, this will look familiar. It's the family report, and it would have been section 1 before, but they've made it shorter and revised it around so that they can gather important information about the child, their family, how they participate in activities and routines in the home and the community. So an important piece of information as you're starting to gather that whole picture of a child. It's flexible in that the nice part is you can have parents fill this out. They can do it in hard copy, they can do it online, or you can do it in an interview, whichever works for your particular families in your program. So that I think makes it feel like it takes a little less time than it did before. And the next slide is the second part of that form. This would have been section 2, and it's called the Family Assessment of Child Skills. Again, you'll see the color coding, and that I think can just help parents know that we're talking about different skills as they go through it. This includes a set of skills that parallel the AEPS 3 test items, especially the goals. So the goal areas are what's covered. So when families are asked to look at this and rate their child's skill, are looking at something that corresponds to the AEPS 3. However, they've been rewritten in much more parent-friendly language, and they have a lot more examples and illustrations for families to help them understand what is being asked. Okay. The child progress record continues. This was one of our favorite tools in the program I was working on, because it always felt like it gave parents such a good picture of where their child was on the AEPS assessment. So what they've done is they've revised it to reflect all the item changes in AEPS 3. Again, it's a very user-friendly way for parents to visualize where my kid is and where they've made progress as subsequent assessments are done. So again, that's a very useful tool. I think our program, we used it a lot at IEP meetings to help us explain where kids were. And the next slide. All right, they've actually made some handouts to use with the family materials. So this is nice because I know a lot of our teachers would say, I need something that kind of explains this process concisely, but yet gives parents an idea of what's going on. And so now there's a tool or a handout that'll look at the AEPS 3, kind of an overview. They'll go over the developmental areas so parents can get an idea, okay, what are these areas that are being assessed in my child? And then the last one there is that they explain each of the forms that we've just been talking about. So the family report, the family assessment of child skills, and the child progress record are kind of briefly described so families know what to expect. And those are available in both English and Spanish. Okay. All right. The Ready Set is something brand new, I think, to the AEPS system. And it's specifically meant to be a brief assessment and progress monitoring measure for children 4 and older. It's really not meant to be used with younger kiddos. The Ready Set emphasizes skills essential for school readiness and that early school success, as we mentioned before. It's composed of 40 developmentally and academically challenging goals from the AEPS 3 test. And it really is something that could be used when you don't need to do a whole AEPS on a child, but you need some information. And you can use this quickly. And then if for some reason the results of this showed some needs, you could always then move into an AEPS 3 assessment very easily by transferring those skills over into an AEPS 3. In our program, we kind of struggled because of budget constraints that we really only used the AEPS 2 for assessing our children with special needs and kiddos we thought were going to need to be given some specialized service. And our peer models, we didn't really have as much to use for assessing. And I think this tool could be an awesome asset to use with peer models as a way to kind of keep track of their skills too. Next slide. This gives you an idea of where each of the test items come from in the Ready Set. You can see it's very heavy in literacy and very heavy in social emotional, which makes a lot of sense when we think about what skills kiddos need going into that kindergarten classroom. So you can see how many are on each area, but then you also have some example goals that are on the Ready Set assessment. So just to give you an idea of what they look like. Okay. All right, last section for me. The AEPS curriculum. Again, just so you know, and I think Amy will probably say this again, but there will be a webinar specifically on Ready Set and on the AEPS curriculum coming up in the next 2 months. So you can get a lot more information than we were able to cover here by signing up for those webinars.
And we'll put those URLs in the chat for you listeners, so you can sign up for those as well.
Okay, great. Great. Okay, so the curriculum itself is guided by, again, that multi-tiered systems of support, blended practices, inclusionary practices, and activity-based intervention frameworks. So again, it's a compilation of all these frameworks into a curricular model that is tied directly to the AEPS assessment. So I like the levels, the way they've renamed them to beginning, which is your infant, and early skills development. So it's birth essentially to 18 months developmentally. And then the growing section, which is your toddler skills, 18 months to 3. And then the ready, preschool and school preparation skills, 3 to 6. So it's just a nice little breakdown of how the different volumes of the AEPS curriculum have been divided out. Next slide. Okay, again, it reflects current best practices used in early childhood programs. It's very much organized by routines and activities. So if you think about how we run our classrooms and even our activities at home, we usually have some routines and we have activities that we do throughout the day. And this curriculum is organized by those types of routines and activities, which makes it a lot more easy to link your assessment into the exact location of where kiddos need to use those skills. It also helps with streamlining your IFSP and IEP plans on how you're going to teach these skills. Okay. Next slide. This gives you the 18 routines and activities that are part of the curriculum. You can get a good feel for what activities and routines they've chosen. And you can also see how they can play in both home and classroom environments. Again, you really want to hit the skills that are going to be in the environment that kids need them in. And this helps do that. Okay, next slide. All right, this is the multi-tiered system. Most of you have probably seen this. But basically, each routine or activity is then formatted so that as you look through it, you will be able to see universal strategies, which are the ones on the bottom, tier 1, for all children. So these are the things, the teaching strategies, the environmental strategies that work for all children. And then tier 2, you move up to where some children may need a little bit of extra help. And so you get a little more focused. And those strategies are also included in the curriculum. And then finally, as you get to the top tier 3, the few children who need that more individual help. And that's going to be much more specialized strategies for each of those routines and activities. The thing that's nice about it goes, okay, you can leave it there. But the nice thing is it's very explicit. So as you start reading through these activities and routines, the ideas and the strategies that the authors have put forth to help you pick out some of your intervention and teaching strategies, it's very thorough and very well organized so that a lot of your guesswork is kind of done for you. So each activity or routine, there's going to be a description, and you can see the art activity in this slide. There'll be a description about what that looks like. It won't necessarily be a recipe. It will be a description that helps you set it up so that it can be an activity that's fluid, I think. But when you read through some of them, they're nice and fluid. You don't have to do the ABC and have it come out. They also list all the skills that are in the AEPS that go with that particular routine or activity. So some of them will have a lot of skills listed and some of them will have less, but they'll be concurrently listed so that you have an idea of, if I'm using this activity for teaching, I'm addressing these skills, even if that's not my target for their goal or objective. And again, the universal strategies, best practices for all kids, the focused, and then the specialized. It's just a real nice format and how they've laid it out for you. I think attending that webinar will be very informative, and I'm looking forward to it. All right.
Great. Thank you, Nancy, for that coverage of all of the exciting changes. I know many of our folks listening today are AEPS-I users. So we wanted to share that AEPS-I will be better than ever, just as much as the AEPS-3 test. So it'll be a new system with a completely redesigned interface. So the AEPS-3 test items will be integrated into that new system. So all of these changes that we were talking about will be into AEPS-I. It's going to be mobile optimized, which will make it work better on phones and tablets. You know, if staff are using an iPad to enter assessment data or even their phone, it'll be a lot easier to do that. And there will also be a family login, so that programs that want families to fill out either the family assessment of child skills or the family report, if they want them to fill them out electronically, they'll be able to allow families to do that. And also, you also can print materials from inside AEPS-I, so if you would want parents to still fill it out on paper, you could still print the forms and do that as well, but it's just another option. We are currently working on the new version of the AEPS-I system, and we're targeting a spring, March 2022 live date for that. So throughout 2022, we're going to be supporting programs who are both transitioning to AEPS-3 on paper and also programs who are transitioning inside AEPS-I, transferring from one system to the other system. We're going to be having free webinars continue. As Nancy mentioned, we have 2 more webinars, and there is in the chat box, there's a link to sign up. There's a webinar on the Ready Set on October 21st and the curriculum on November 4th. And we're going to continue this webinar series into 2022 with different topics to help people as they transition. So when you fill out your survey, one of the questions asks what other topics you might be interested in having webinars on. So it would be really helpful if you share your thoughts on what you might like to see in 2022 as you continue using AEPS. So pricing for the new online system will be announced in October 2021, as well as some more details about the transition plan for timing for when programs will be able to transition. And we will have free trials for AEPS-I available in the spring of 2022. And I will also take this moment to address, we had a question from one of our listeners when they registered for the webinar. They asked whether there was going to be a way to convert current AEPS scores, so AEPS-2 second edition test scores, to convert them over for AEPS-3 scores so you could compare, so you'd have some continuity in monitoring progress. So we wanted to let you know that we are looking at a range of options and guidance because we know different programs are going to have different requirements for monitoring child outcomes and progress monitoring as they switch between editions. So we're looking at whether we can make available conversion charts that help with equating the second edition scores with the third edition scores, as we did when we switched back from the first edition to the second edition many years ago. We had those. So the analysis on that is underway. And then we're also working at outlining functionality inside AEPS-I that will support OSEP child outcomes reporting during this transition period. So more information on all of that is coming soon. So, and really, there'll be a slide later. The best way to stay up to date is to make sure you're signed up for the AEPS newsletter. That will have all the most up-to-date information about the transition process. So we had a couple listeners when they registered asking about training options. So I just wanted to briefly share. So coming in 2022, there'll be a self-paced introductory online course that individuals can take. There will be an updated inter-rater reliability certification for the third edition. Those are online modules that you can watch to be certified. And then we will also have live training through Brooks on Location. Similar to the live training that's available for the second edition. We'll have an introductory training, an advanced training, and training on AEPS-I. Okay, so now we're going to transition back to Diane, who's going to talk a little bit about the research studies.
Yes, and just a little bit because we think your questions are so important. But as you can see, it's a very comprehensive link system, and it's big, and it takes a while to try to explain all the pieces. We did field research on the AEPS 3 between 2012 and 2015. And that research was led by two of the authors, Jennifer Grisham Brown and Misty Waddell, and they did an incredible job of gathering an array of data to try to demonstrate to people the validity, reliability of pieces. Without going into much detail, because the detail is in the system, it's volume 1, chapter 7, gives you great detail about all the research that's gone on, but just let me give you a quick overview. We did do a validity study. We involved a whole array of experts throughout the country and did tailor items based on that feedback. We've done qualitative analysis of the authors, and we've also done some actual data collection on validity and reliability. Do we have another slide? Okay. There you can read very quickly is the utility study, and I'm not going to go over them right now because I want us to get to questions. But again, as I said, if you have any questions, the data collection process is explained in great detail in chapter 7, or you can get in touch with any of the authors and we'd be happy to address any questions that you would have on the research. And there are 2 published articles that you can get to also. So, all right. Let's move on to the questions, okay?
Okay, so if you have questions, you can go ahead and type them into the question box now. I'm just going to quickly go through the last slides here. So AEPS 3 products will be available in November 2021 in just a few short weeks. So there is an introductory price for the AEPS 3 complete kit, which is where you get all 5 volumes, the quick reference guide, the packs of the forms, and that USB, which has all the forms in printable format, as well as printable versions of the quick reference guide, the family handouts, the assessment activities. It really has, there's a lot of, there are a lot of planning files to help you on there. So it's a great resource. You can pre-order the products now. We're offering a free shipping code for anyone listening to this webinar. So if you use AEPS Web, type that in the shopping cart, you'll get free shipping on orders to US and Canadian addresses throughout the end of the year, so through December 31st. This link is in your chat, so I'll just say we talked already, there are 2 more webinars coming, so we encourage you to join us for those. And I've also, if one of my colleagues will drop this newsletter sign up in the chat as well, I really encourage you to sign up for the newsletter, stay up to date on all of the AEPS news and AEPS-I transition news that's coming. It's really the best way to watch your email for that. Okay. Another survey reminder to win a survey, and here's your certificate. So I'll leave this up just for a minute as we start taking questions. So if you're watching the recording right now, I encourage you to pause this and jot down that URL, and that's where you can get your certificate. If you're watching live, it's in the handout section. You can also go to this URL, and there'll be a link in your follow-up email tomorrow. Okay, so it looks like we do have a lot of good questions. We do have people asking questions about the literacy and math area and how to use those with children under the age of 3. People are wondering, are those only for kids older than 3? If you were working in early intervention, would you just skip those areas?
I can probably address that. It probably depends a lot on the child and the program, but there will be in each of those areas some basic skills that they can probably address for younger children. But the majority of those are really directed at older children and their pre-academic skills.
Okay. Thank you, Diane. We have a listener asking, will there be cutoff scores available for eligibility?
Yes, they are available now. We have them. We are continuing data collection to enhance the number of children we have at the different age intervals. So we are continuing to do data collection, but there are cutoff scores available, and you should be able to use them.
Okay. Great, thank you. We have a listener asking, will the APSI family login and the handouts be available in Spanish? So yes, those family report, family handouts will be available in Spanish, both in APSI and in the printable, in the paper versions. On that USB that has the whole English section and a whole Spanish section of forms. And another question about the USB, if the USB is purchased, is there a limit on the number of forms or resources that can be printed? No, those are PDF files. And if you purchase the AEPS, the USB for your organization, you can print unlimited and use it, for many years, and print your assessment forms and your family forms and family handouts from that. Okay, we are getting lots of questions about how long the current version of AEPSI is going to be supported. So we're going to have information about specific timelines coming soon, but we will be supporting users throughout that, and we'll have time, and people will have time to plan for the transition. So it will not be a short time period. It will be long enough for programs to plan out to transition over. And we'll, in October, we will, which is soon. So in the next couple weeks, we will have information about some of the timelines for how long the current version will be up, and how to get kids information from that existing system, how to get it transferred over. There will be import functionality that will allow you to move children's data over to the new system. Okay. Let's see, we have a listener asking about the reliability and validity of using AEPS 3 with children who speak a different language than English. So was there research done with that population?
No, we do not have any data collection on that. We're hoping that as people, as with the AEPS 2 has been translated, which has been translated into different languages, we're assuming that this will happen with 3 also. And when that happens, we encourage people to do their own data collection. We also encourage, when those kinds of adaptations and translations occur, there are some of the areas that it's really fundamental that they do some serious thinking about, particularly the social communication, because languages are different. And so we do encourage people to adopt it, speak other languages in other countries, but we also make it really clear they need to go out and do their own data collection on their population of children.
Great. Let's see. Do you have an approximate on how long does it typically take to administer the AEPS 3?
Nancy, can you hazard a guess?
I can't answer it. A lot of it will depend on if it's an initial assessment or a continuing assessment. But one thing I didn't mention, and hopefully when there's a webinar or something training on scoring and administration, this will be talked about a lot more, but you don't have a ceiling and a basal. You basically go in and through observations and knowledge about the kid and other people who know the kiddo, you look at whether or not skills at a certain level have already been reached. And if so, like if they're walking, you basically can credit most of the skills under that gross motor piece of crawling and sitting and those kinds of things. So, and then the same for when you get to the top. I think it, and again, Diane, you might have to correct me, but for some reason there was something about a number, and I want to say 10, but I don't know if that's right. When I was reading through the scoring information, But there is if you do a certain number of tests items and they're getting zeros, then you would not go any further. So there's some helpful hints in the manual as you start to explore it and learn it better.
Yeah. Yeah, the test isn't like a norm-based test in the sense of it's age-related. What it is developmentally laid out. And so most children tend to follow those developmental sequences. Of course, not all kids, because we know that we have children who indeed are unique. However, the majority of children do follow basic sequences. And so once you figure out where the child is in that sequence, then it's really easy to score because you know where he is, you know he can't do the steps above, and you know that he can do the steps below. So it really simplifies the score. And the other way that I believe makes it more usable, because I know teachers and childcare workers and interventionists are busy, they've got more to do than they have time to do. But once you have selected items that you're going to work on with a child, those are the only items you really need to go in and assess again. You don't need to assess the whole range of other items. You just need to look at those that you're focusing your time, program resources on, and monitor child progress focused on those items.
Thank you. We have a listener question about whether there are age ranges related to when you would expect skills to be mastered in typically developing children. Are there age ranges included?
No. I have, for the many years, almost 50 that I've been associated with the AEPS, I have had on a regular basis people ask me to assign ages to the items, and I will not do that. And the reason that I will not do that is because that should not be your focus. Your focus should be on what the child can do and what the next step is to do. It doesn't matter if it's a 3-year-old item or a 4-year-old item. What matters is what the child is capable of and what the next target should be. So no, there are no age specifications on the AEPS items. And as long as I'm alive, there won't be.
Thank you. We have a listener asking, so if you had a 6-year-old typically developing child, would a score of 100% be expected for that child?
Are they talking about the AEPS or Ready Set or?
Yeah. They don't specify, but I guess the AEPS 3.
You know, within reason, yes. If it's a typical developing 6-year-old, you would expect the 6-year-old to be able to do all items on the AEPS, yes.
Okay. All right, so we are a little bit over on our time. So if we did not get a chance to answer your question, we will follow up afterwards. I know some people had some specific questions that we're gonna need to go to our implementation team for to get answers back to you, but we will do that. So thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you, Diane and Nancy, for your time to share this information with us.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Everyone had a great rest of their day. Thank you.